Florida didn't lose its tourism empire to a recession, a hurricane, or a pandemic. It lost $37 billion because of its own politicians.
The Tourism Council reviews 184 countries, and the U.S. was the only one to report a drop in visitor spending.
The number of foreign visitors continues to slump. Travel research firm Tourism Economics is predicting now that the U.S. will see 8% fewer international travelers.
Fort Lauderdale tourism officials say they've seen a marked decline in the number of Canadians visiting the state since U.S. President Donald Trump began making 51st state comments.
In this video, we're unpacking how arrogance, political posturing, and one devastating bill triggered a meltdown that's still unfolding and made millions of tourists never come back. If your biggest customers left, would you welcome them back? Or double down until your economy collapsed? Let us know in the comments, because what happened in Florida could happen anywhere. Tourism is Florida's bloodline, and Canadian visitors have long been its most loyal customer base. These aren't quick-stay tourists coming for a selfie in a theme park. They're snowbirds. Seasonal residents who spend months at a time in Florida drop an average of $33,000 each per household and return year after year. They fill restaurants, stock grocery stores, keep rentals booked, and keep small business doors open. But when politics turned hostile, the numbers turned tragic. Canadians started pulling back, and in just 2 years, thousands stopped booking entirely. It didn't begin with a tropical storm or economic crash. It started with rhetoric. When President Trump called Canada the 51st state, foreign policy lines blurred into national insults. Tariffs followed, and the response was swift. Millions of Canadians lost interest in traveling to the U.S. Their top destination, Florida, and that loyalty flipped. A boycott started small, but quietly spread. Politicians didn't respond with diplomacy. They responded with denial, and Florida businesses started noticing the silence before anyone counted the losses. Take Richard Cleet, a hotel owner in Hollywood, Florida, before the political blowback. His winter season was booked solid, returning Canadians, seasonal retiree regulars, all of them investing weeks or even months in the area. But after Trump's rhetoric and the snowballing unrest, 50% of his Canadian visitors vanished. Bookings dried up. Reservations canceled mid-season. Some emailed to say plainly, "We're no longer comfortable supporting Florida." Richard didn't blame them. He blamed leadership for forgetting who really powered the winter economy. While business owners scrambled to adjust, Florida politicians made things worse. In the middle of an international tourism pullback, they pushed a bill that would eliminate all 62 of Florida's tourist development councils, every regional team in charge of bringing in tourism dollars. These weren't fluff jobs. These were full-time operators directly responsible for beach restoration, sports tourism, media promotion, and annual events that fueled entire local economies. Without them, Florida wouldn't just lose commercials, it would lose customers. What a lot of voters didn't realize is how deeply Florida tourism depended on those councils. They're funded by hotel taxes, not taxpayer dollars, and bring in an estimated $2 billion annually. But the proposed bill would pull the plug, sacrificing that income stream and killing the very system built to attract global visitors. Destinations Florida, a key tourism advocate, warned that eliminating the TDCs would cost the state $37 billion in total economic impact. That includes over $22 billion in wages across 2 million Florida jobs. What did the public get in exchange for this potential $37 billion blow? A $60 property tax cut. That was the math some lawmakers pitched as a win for homeowners, sacrificing entire industries to save what amounts to one dinner bill per year. Economists and small business owners slammed it immediately. It wasn't just risky, it was suicidal. McDonald's wouldn't fire its marketing department to save on power bills. But that's essentially what Florida tried to do. Except instead of burgers, it cost servers, cleaners, and hotel staff their livelihoods. Robert Scrobb, executive director of Destinations Florida, didn't mince words when asked to respond. He called it economic sabotage. The loss wasn't hypothetical. It was measurable. Events, conventions, and sports tournaments were already being reconsidered or canceled. Middle-class resort towns, already hurting from reduced Canadian travel, would absorb cuts head-on. And Floridians weren't just losing tourist dollars. They were losing jobs tied directly to those visitors. A quiet disaster unfolding beneath the sound bites. It's not just one industry. It's the interconnection that makes this dangerous. When fewer visitors come, hotels Slash staff, restaurants cut hours, storefronts stay closed, but it spreads further. Rental car zones go idle, property managers freeze hiring, laundry services, delivery teams, roadside vendors, all of it feels the cut. The sunshine economy isn't just floats and parades. It's logistical. If thousands of Canadians stay home in winter, entire zip codes shift overnight. That's what was already happening. Then the TDC bill made it worse. Meanwhile, the people defending the cuts argue Florida was still seeing overall tourism growth. Governor DeSantis proudly quoted 34.4 million total Q2 visitors. But buried in that stat was a real pain. Just 640,000 were Canadians. That's a massive 20% drop from the year before. Numbers don't lie. And these weren't $200 quick trip tourists. These were $30,000 seasonal spenders with deep habits and long histories. Swapping snowbirds for short-stay budget travelers is not an equal trade, no matter how you spin it. Others tried to spin the shift as a win. Florida tourism officials mentioned gains from Brazil and other countries, but the data tells a humbling truth. Brazilian tourists stay shorter, spend less, and typically visit major cities, leaving small towns and snowbird zones to dry up. Florida's tourism machine wasn't fragile because of availability. It was fragile because specific customer segments pumped the bulk of the dollars, and no group did that more faithfully than Canadian winter guests. But trust, once broken, doesn't book again easily. The cost of eliminating Florida's tourism councils wasn't theoretical. According to a full economic review, the loss of TDC-managed visitor outreach and event promotion would directly hurt more than 2 million workers statewide. These aren't CEOs and corporate execs. These are front desk clerks, food runners, small property managers, janitors, valet drivers, hostesses. Real people whose paychecks are directly tied to hotel bookings, vacation rentals, and recurring winter traffic. When the flow of visitors slows, the tip jar dries up, and cutting funding to the thing that brought tourists and made the problem viral. To understand what Florida gave up, you need to understand what was working. The state welcomed over 142.9 million visitors in 2024, a record. Tourism generated more than $150 billion in economic impact and fueled over 2.1 million jobs. Florida wasn't broken. It was booming. People were flying in, driving down, booking online. But instead of strengthening the growth engine, state leaders tried to strip its core funding mechanisms. The optics? They made it look like tourism was a budget drain. But in reality, they were defunding Florida's biggest profit center. The logic behind the cuts didn't hold up. Leaders insisted the state could save money, reallocate funds, or even trust the free market to handle tourism organically. But marketing doesn't work that way. You don't stop advertising because you're successful. You double down. Ask anyone who's ever run a business. When momentum is high, you pour gas on it, not yank the battery. Destinations like Mexico and the Bahamas don't rest on their beaches. They advertise harder. And if Florida doesn't keep up, market share declines, even with sunshine on the brochure. Annie Holcomb, an executive helping manage vacation rentals across Panama City and the Gulf Coast, put it bluntly, you don't stop marketing when you're on top. She watched bookings taper off after the Canadian dip began in early 2024. Now, with TDC support possibly on the chopping block, even owners with 5-star ratings and competitive rates are worried. Why? Because visibility is the product in travel. If seasonal guests don't see ads, if they don't hear buzz, if no one posts about your town, they book somewhere else. It happens faster than most elected officials realize. Replacing Canadian tourists isn't simple. It's not just about total head count. Different tourists spend differently. A Canadian couple renting for 3 months in Naples doesn't behave like a Brazilian family visiting Miami for 5 days. The former become part of the local economy, tipping generously, hiring landscapers, joining clubs, stocking local restaurants on repeat. The latter, they come, they go. That's not bad, but it's not comparable. Shifting tourist demographics without anchoring replacement value is like swapping out a $100 bill for 5 crumpled ones. There's another layer to disaster: community assimilation. Canadian snowbirds weren't just back and forth tourists. They had relationships in Florida, trusted auto shops, favorite hairdressers, grocery clerks who remembered their names. That's decades of emotional customer equity. And when they felt disrespected from political level, they didn't protest loudly. They just stopped coming. For places like Sarasota, Naples, Clearwater, and the Villages, this wasn't economic theory. It was empty chairs, blank invoices, shuttered cafe hours, and properties sitting empty mid-season. By the middle of 2025, the difference was visible. Local news clips showed entire beachfront neighborhoods that were once packed with seasonal license plates empty, car traffic down 30%, service calls fading, bookings dry. Small business owners started speaking out. Realtors began posting price reductions on Instagram, shocked by the number of luxury and vacation listings staying stagnant. This wasn't fear-mongering. It was happening. And still, the state's leadership leaned on broad tourism stats as if that would cancel out the real-time collapse of specific communities. The most dangerous part of this isn't that visitor numbers dropped. It's that leadership refused to admit it mattered. Florida's governor stood at a podium and cited positives. New tourist segments, increase from South America, broader international interest. But none of those markets had velocity like Canada. No group stayed longer, spent more consistently, or built more loyalty. You can't build 20-year customer relationships overnight, and you definitely can't replace the entire northern winter market with a different demo and expect no impact. Local TDC directors tried to sound the alarm, but many felt their voices drown in rhetoric. Some counties actively paused expansion plans, event centers, marketing blitzes, beach restoration initiatives, all because state policy might choke their budgets. Quiet panic hit places like Lee, Collier, and Pinellas Counties hardest. Those areas depended most on high spend, long-stay guests from up north. When those checks stopped rolling in, county-level economic growth figures reversed. Subtly at first, then brutally. The dollar doesn't just speak, it walks, and it leaves quietly. By late summer, Forbes reported a 34% drop in Canadian car visits to the U.S., with Florida taking an outsized hit. And still, the policy logic didn't change. Legislators continued referencing high-level numbers to frame their decisions. But here's the reality. Overall tourism numbers up doesn't mean economic impact up. 100 tourists spending $400 each don't replace 10 snowbirds spending $30,000. It's basic arithmetic. And Florida got it wrong. Worse yet, they got it wrong publicly, and the world has receipts. In places like Fort Myers Beach, the Canadian absence wasn't just noticed, it was felt. Streets once lined with Ontario and Quebec plates stood half empty. Snowbird-heavy neighborhoods turned eerily quiet in January. Florida's should be peak season. Boarded shops blinked like time capsules. Vacation rentals stayed dark. And businesses that looked forward to Q1 surges barely stayed open. Locals called it the ghost winter. And it wasn't because of weather. It was because the people who kept this economy alive during the slowest months just stopped coming. Clearwater told a similar story. The beachfront economy that once danced with snowbird money started to skip beats. 2 for sale signs on every block. Inventory climbing. Restaurant owners started laying off staff. Coffee shops cut hours. Rental owners slashed December rates and still came up empty. What was once a high-dollar seasonal cycle had become an off-season that wouldn't end. Canadians didn't leave dramatically. They didn't have to. They just left quietly. And the silence was louder than any protest. Meanwhile, small business owners with no political agenda suddenly became battleground witnesses. Property managers saw cancellations double. Tour guides trimmed brochures. Everyone felt the tourist engine sputter. Hoteliers reached out to tourism task forces asking for help, but budget freezes loomed. The TDC slashing scared vendors into hibernation. If the state wouldn't support their own tourism infrastructure, what else could unravel? The travel ecosystem has no off switch, but it does have a slow kill setting, and Florida toggled it without warning. Sports tourism felt the burn next. These weren't luxury perks. These were annual economic drivers. Youth baseball tournaments, beach volleyball championships, senior golf weeks. All of it funded regionally by TDC dollars and designed to fill hotels, neighborhood pizza places, gas stations, and grocery stores over multi-day events. Without those funds, events started dropping. Cities lost hosts. Parents picked other states. It wasn't just spring break status at risk. It was Florida's entire B-level economic engine losing steam before leadership even noticed. Legislators tried salvaging the headlines. Some claimed small counties were misusing funds. Others called marketing wasteful. One even said people already knew about Florida and didn't need to see ads to visit. But numbers told another story. In 2022, TDC campaigns produced an ROI of nearly 8:1 in key markets, meaning for every dollar spent, 8 came back. Killing those programs didn't save money. It just severed the revenue chain from front. Even a bake sale wouldn't do that. Yet lawmakers pushed forward acting like basic math had changed. Visit Florida tried to keep messaging positive. They pointed to overall visitor gains, lifted up spikes from South America and domestic weekenders. But internally, even they knew the ground was crumbling. Staff morale dropped, budgets were unclear, and brands and influencers started asking if Florida was still safe reputationally. It wasn't about hurricanes anymore. It was about hospitality. And in tourism, perception is everything. The message Florida was sending wasn't welcome. It was, we don't need you. And that message echoed globally. And let's talk about Brazil, a terrific tourist market, but not a Canadian replacement. The average Brazilian tourist spends fewer nights, often concentrates their bookings in Miami and Orlando, and avoids inland counties that rely on seasonal spread. You can't drop a new flag in the map and expect identical velocity. Canadians spent slow, deep, and repeatedly. The visitors Florida hoped to replace them with spent quickly and then disappeared. The result? More hotel rooms filled for fewer days at discounted rates. A slower bleed, but a real one. Local business owners weren't confused. They knew immediately the loss wasn't about heads, it was about habits. Canadians were habitual. They had snowbird routines, stores, tea times, doctors, even dogs that knew which Florida beach to nap on. They bought propane by the tank and filled community halls with music. They referred friends. They came back. And when they left, they didn't just remove credit cards. They took an entire seasonal rhythm out of Florida's small towns. That rhythm? It's nowhere to be found in 2025. Governor DeSantis remained optimistic publicly. He quoted quarterly momentum, celebrated resilience, and brushed off the media's allegations of collapse. His administration cited new anchor markets abroad. But the tourism industry isn't built on press conferences. It's built on repeat behavior. And the behavior, the actual bookings, the foot traffic, the checkout receipts, told a different story. Political denial doesn't change vacancy rates. Optimism can't pay restaurant rent. And good vibes don't cancel $7,000 insurance quotes for empty condos. It's almost unbelievable. Florida tourism made historic gains during and after the pandemic, racking up hundreds of billions in economic activity. And just as that recovery peaked, leadership pulled away the scaffolding holding the system up, not because of evidence, but because of optics. What started as political posturing toward big government marketing became an economy-sinking side effect. The short version? Florida shot itself in the foot while standing on a winning streak. And local communities are still limping through the fallout. Tourism isn't just about arrivals, it's about reputation. And by late 2025, Florida's brand was no longer just sunshine and sand. It was controversy. It was headlines. It was international travel forums warning snowbirds to look elsewhere. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It drains quietly. But once it's gone, rebuilding takes a decade, not a season. Tourists don't just need deals. They need to feel wanted. And every time politicians dismissed or mocked Canadian concerns, they weren't reclaiming toughness. They were pushing millions in loyalty right out of state. Carol Dover, president of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, didn't need spreadsheets to see the damage. Her members called daily with stories. Hotels running lean, cafes closing early, golf reservations disappearing. She didn't say this was a temporary pullback. She said it was structural, a permanent shift unless something major changes. And she's right. Because creating jobs isn't possible if leadership keeps torpedoing the demand side of the equation. You don't win economies by defunding your strongest business unit. What makes this story so infuriating is how preventable it was. Other tourism-driven states figure out how to market without turning into political battlegrounds. California didn't gut its destination funding. Texas didn't alienate entire countries. Even in divided states, officials knew better than to mess with what was working. Florida had everything: infrastructure, name recognition, natural beauty, Disney, cruise ports, international airports, a loyal customer base. That's not luck. That's decades of positioning. Then one administration tossed it aside for talking points. And it wasn't just Canadians watching. International booking trends show early signs that other tourists are pulling back too. Not loudly, but subtly, spending less time, waiting longer to book, choosing alternatives in the Caribbean or Central America. Because once people feel unwelcome or uneasy, they stop coming. That's how tourism works. It's about perception. And Florida's perception has changed. For people deciding where to spend $10,000 this winter, The math is 1 part pricing and 1 part trust. Every hotel GM, every rental manager, every shuttle driver knows this. Tourists talk to each other. They share. They blog. They review. And when stories start spreading about feeling alienated, priced out, or looked down on, it doesn't stay isolated. It grows. Word of mouth is the most powerful marketing Florida ever had. When it turns sour, no press conference could clean it up, and you can't run Facebook ads to fix a broken relationship with your best customer base. International travel is competitive. Every country with a shoreline is chasing these same travelers. Florida used to compete with spots like the Bahamas, Spain, the French Riviera, even Arizona. But those destinations stayed quiet, professional, and welcoming. Florida got loud. Political headlines started replacing resort photos in search results. And that shift doesn't just kill clicks, it kills dreams. People want to believe their vacations will feel like home. Floridians know that, but politicians forgot it. There's irony here so sharp, it almost cuts deeper than the economic impact itself. Florida brands itself as the free state, but to millions of global tourists, it no longer feels that way. Free speech turned hostile. Free travel became complicated. International visitors used to feel like family here. Now, they feel like outsiders. For a state whose identity was built on inclusiveness and hospitality, that pivot might be the single greatest branding mistake in tourism history. The beaches didn't change, but the welcome mat got rolled up. Florida already had momentum. All it had to do was keep steady. Let the visitors come. Let the economy rise naturally. But instead, political choices broke the system from within. Not with bombs, but with a broken understanding of how service economies thrive. They require care, diplomacy, branding, visibility, marketing. Florida had all of that, and it traded every bit of it for a few bold headlines. The rest of the world took notes and took their wallets somewhere else. By the end of 2025, the numbers tell a cruel story. Tourism impact down. Canadian visits slashed nearly in half over a few years. Tournaments canceled. Flight data shifted. Confidence broken. The worst part? It didn't have to be this way. Florida had already won the competition. Political arrogance turned victory into erosion, and the people paying the price were never in office. They were behind counters, in kitchens, on front desks, and on the ground floor of an economy left hanging. When politicians declare war on their own best customers, everyone loses. Not slowly. Immediately, Florida didn't just lose money. It lost market share, headlines, long-term trust, and entire neighborhoods powered by the same people they pushed away. The ripple effects will take years to fix. And the tragedy is stunning. Florida didn't collapse because of a storm. It collapsed because it forgot who it was built to serve. Florida didn't lose because of hurricanes, inflation, or global instability. It lost because the people in power forgot what built the economy in the first place. Trust, relationships, and respect for the people who kept showing up. You can rebuild buildings, but rebuilding reputation? That takes longer. And this time, the damage wasn't done by nature. It was done by choice. If you watched Florida's fall from the outside or felt it from within, hit like, share, and subscribe. Because if one state can undo decades of success with few bad decisions, any state can.